Hello and welcome into this edition of the Golf Channel podcast with Rex and Lav. Happy BMW Championship week to all who celebrate. I am clearly on site here at Castle Pines, site of the penultimate event of the FedEx Cup season. Rex, these are the best and brightest top 50 players on the PGA Tour. The Tour Championship is next week in Atlanta, where $25 million will be doled out to the winner and potentially deciding the Player of the Year race on the PGA Tour. What has you excited for the week in Colorado?
The golf course, Castle Pines. It's been a long time. I mean, it was a tour staple for so long, and it's 8,100 feet and some change, somewhere around there. You're at altitude. I love it when we go, obviously not a new place, but somewhere that probably gets the players a little bit out of their norm. I'm sure you're going to fill us in. I mean, I would be curious. This goes back to when the WGC was held in Mexico City, and how much work the guys had to put in on the range before playing that first round, just trying to get the new numbers because the ball's going to go so far. I think that's kind of interesting.
That's certainly interesting. That's a story that I'm writing today for NBCSports.com.
You just missed it, though, I think, on Sunday night. Is it a big deal, or are you doing this excitedly? You actually look you look a little peckish. Are you all right?
No, I'm definitely flushed. Huffing and puffing up the streets. I'm well aware that I'm not in the best physical shape, but Castle Pines has underscored that point dramatically. I mean, we're at 6,400 feet above sea level. I think the actual golf course has like 400 feet of elevation change. I walked the front nine, caught up to Rory McIlroy about halfway through for the story that's going to appear later, just sort of getting his numbers, because you could just tell, Rex, like with the numbers that Rory McIlroy is going to put up this week. And I was just typing it for the story again. That's going to be on the website here shortly. Like his 54-degree sand wedge, typically at sea level at home, will go 128 yards. Here at 6,400 yards, it's going 145. A stock 7-iron at home goes 195. Now it's going 222. I think everyone is curious to see what Rory McIlroy does off the tee, because he's second on the PGA Tour in driving distance at 319 per pop on average. Obviously, that varies per golf course conditions, weather conditions, whatever the case may be. He said this week it's anywhere from 350 to 375, and if the right conditions allow, you're going to see some drives, not just by Rory, but other players who are going to be pushing 400 yards. You could just tell, like, in a couple of years, that the data from this week is going to be used in like the rollback debate. Like it's like the easiest, most foregone conclusion that people are going to use this in that sort of debate. I think it's a lot of fun. I asked Roy, so like, this is the penultimate week of the FedEx Cup season. Is this a fun challenge that you're spending your Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday seeing how far all these clubs are going, or is it a nuisance? Competitively, is it a distraction, a nuisance, however you want to describe it, to be having to do this on a tournament that is essentially a setup for something so large? He said, look, I've been on tour for 18 years. Anything fun, anything new, anything different, anything remotely challenging is something that he can lean into. And I think a lot of players have embraced that attitude as well, Rex.
And I loved going back to Mexico City, and I'm sure guys are doing the same thing on the range here, where you'll just have them set up with the TrackMan or whatever they use, maybe the quad, and they're getting the stock yardages for each one of those clubs. But what they discovered, at least in Mexico City, that I thought was interesting is it's just not 10% or 12% or 8%, whatever it might be across the board, that depending on what club you're using, how much you're spinning it, how high you're launching it, you're getting more percentage-wise based on what you normally hit it versus what you might think you're going to hit it at altitude. And I think that's the fun part. That's the exciting part. Back in Mexico City, very, very short story. Back in Mexico City, if you remember correctly, there was one year when a bunch of players and caddies got sick because of food poisoning, whatever the case may be. Kevin Kisner's longtime caddy, Dewey, who now works for Sepp Straka, he came down with something, and so Kiz was scrambling one morning trying to find a caddy to caddy for him. And I walked by him on the range, and he kind of looks me up and down and goes, what do you think? Do you think you could caddy? And I gave it a long, pregnant pause to the point that he finally said, never mind. Like, well, why? What takes so long? And I go, I can carry the bag. Like, that part's not going to bother me, even at altitude. Like, doing the math would be the part that scares me, because I'm not good at just basic math. And now you add these numbers into it. It'll be fun to watch and to hear the interaction. I want to hear announcers this week do a lot of laying out, because I want to hear the caddy and the player interaction about exactly this should be a stock 9-iron, but because of the conditions, because of elevation, because of everything, you're going to have to put so much more thought into it. I love that.
Yeah, it's exactly like what we saw for the Open Championship, right, at Royal Troon, where was it Saturday that was the terrible conditions? I forget. It's either Friday or Saturday, the absolutely terrible conditions. And they had sort of like the wind meter, and it would show like 20 mile per hour into. And I think at home in Florida, if we have 20 miles an hour, okay, let's take an extra club, maybe club and a half, whatever the case may be. I was shocked seeing that broadcast that 20 miles an hour actually equates to like a 35-yard difference. It's actually like 3.5 clubs, which you and I do not really factor in enough. Talking to Rory, he said essentially like a mid-iron this week would be about a 12% difference. The longer clubs is about 15%. But again, there's so many other variables that go into it. The trajectory of the shot, the ball does not curve or shape as much when it's at altitude. The temperature, it's been like melt your face off hot, as you can tell by my face, over the past couple of days here. But in the mornings, it's a little bit cooler. The wind's supposed to pick up. It's supposed to get softer. It's supposed to get a little bit rainy. Like all of these sort of computations then factor in, Rex, to a golf course where you have a lot of forced carries, where you have a lot of false fronts, where you actually have to be precise and trust that, okay, I'm going to hit a 5-iron from 250, but if it does not carry the proper distance, I'm going to be in a world of hurt. So I think it's going to be not necessarily a guessing game, but I think there's going to be more indecision than you typically see week to week on the PGA Tour. And I think that's a lot of fun for viewers.
Now, you live in Florida. We both live in Florida. What does melt your face off hot for Colorado? I would think it's warm because there's a heat dome of some sort over that area of the country. But give me the temperature. What's the actual number?
I mean, it was like 93 or 94 yesterday. But again, you're at 6,400 feet above sea level,
and no humidity.
It feels like the sun is right here, just absolutely pounding on you. Whereas last week in Memphis, like it's a heat advisory, but it's a wet heat and it's 110 degree heat index. Like it's wildly different. They're putting PGA Tour players and certainly the caddies through the ringer, lugging a 50-pound bag. First of all, last week in suffocating heat and humidity. This week at elevation, which presents sort of its own challenges health-wise. And then again next week where you're going to be in Atlanta, which is guaranteed to be stifling hot once again. So they're certainly putting the players, they're definitely making it tough for everybody in these FedEx Cup postseason.
And we got this curveball from Eamon Lynch on Monday's live from Golf Today, where it was not in the rundown. So I don't think either one of us were prepared for this question. However, the question was, should players be allowed to wear shorts? Essentially, when it's melt your face hot.
I scoffed at it.
You did scoff at it because you didn't have a very good answer because we weren't prepared, because it wasn't in our notes. We weren't told to prepare for that particular question. So both of us sort of dismissed the idea. Now, have you changed your mind?
No, I'm wearing pants. I'm wearing pants today, unless it's like deemed unsafe. Like apparently 110 heat index is not deemed unsafe by PGA Tour meteorologist or PGA Tour officials. I would think anything higher than that, 115, certainly 120, then you're getting into a territory where like you need to take some certain precautions. Until then, let these guys dress professionally. Isn't that like one of the main criticisms that people have of LIV, is that it feels and looks like an unserious competition with the music going, with shirts untucked, with shorts? Like, if the PGA Tour is supposed to be this legacy brand and the premier form of competition, then shouldn't they be dressed like professional competitors?
No, that's ridiculous. There are a number of reasons for us to sit here and debate why some fans don't seem to like LIV Golf. 54 holes, shotgun starts, loud music. Shorts is not one of them. I don't think anybody has a problem. They let PGA Tour players wear shorts on practice round days. You go back a few years at the PGA Championship. They let the competitors wear shorts on competition days. I don't think anybody looked at that and rolled their eyes because it's simply a part of the game. I think that's a ridiculous comment.
But no one's also passing out. Like, we haven't had any health scares on the PGA Tour, so clearly pants are that much of a deterrent. That's enough about the golf course, Rex. What do you think about the main storylines player-wise as we head now into the penultimate event of the PGA Tour season? Scottie Scheffler has a significant advantage in the FedEx Cup playoffs. Mathematically, he can drop no lower than second. So he would be starting in second place next week, the Tour Championship, which would be 8 under par if Xander Schauffele wins and Scottie finishes poorly, which, as we've seen from Scottie Scheffler this season, is almost certain to not happen. Player-wise, though, what are you most interested in seeing?
Well, and we sort of dismissed this last week as well, so it's going to be a little harder to sell it right now. But the points, I mean, going into East Lake, Making it to the Tour Championship comes with its share of perks. You're pretty much guaranteed to get into all 4 major championships. You have an opportunity to make a whole lot of money. As you just pointed out, someone's going to take home $25 million and the money drops off not dramatically after that. So all of those things are really good perks. I would also say that historically, if you look at top players, making it to Eastlake is something they put on the list. I think going back a few years when JT was sharing sort of that list that he puts on his phone every year, making it to the Tour Championship matters to these players because it shows you that not only did you have a good year, but you had a good year consistently. Because you look at some of the players that right now are on the bubble, and it's going to be that top 30 bubble that we sit and talk about. I think that's the surprising part. Tommy Fleetwood, I feel like, has had a really good year. I mean, maybe, he hasn't won, and that's certainly something we can talk about, but he's 31st right now. Chris Kirk, again, I thought Chris has had a really good year. He's 32nd.
He won a signature event, Rex, and he's still outside the top 30.
Yeah, I mean, we can keep going down the list. Your boy, Will Zalatoris, I thought he had a pretty solid year, and yet he's outside the bubble right now. So, again, we sort of dismissed this on Sunday, and I will circle back around and repeat what we've said numerous times, that last week in Memphis, that's the most important tournament on the PGA Tour schedule now, because top 50 matters more now than ever, and it's only going to get more and more important. But yeah, there's plenty to play for this week and to watch. I don't know that we end up with the fireworks like we did on Sunday, where not only do you have a player like Hideki coming down the stretch trying to win a tournament, but you also have guys like Nick Dumlak coming down the stretch going to the 18th hole, just trying to make that top 30 bubble.
Yeah, I'm not trying to poo-poo my presence here at the BMW Championship.
Well, you're not there all week, so you'll do that on your own.
Well, yes, all but like one time in the past decade have I covered this event. But I think moving forward, I want to cover the FedEx St. Jude Championship because the BMW has always been, well, most certainly, has always been like that cutoff point where it was hugely significant for a player's career to get into the Tour Championship field. That sets you up in at least 3 of the majors for 2025. Obviously, life-changing money was always on the line. I remember when $10 million used to be like a big deal to these guys. Like Billy Horschel was talking, he was the FedEx Cup champion in 2014. They said, looking back, he gave $1 million to his caddy. He was like, I did not come for money, and all of a sudden I've got $8 million, $9 million deferred. However, they do it. Like, I know, unless I am very reckless with my money, I have now set up myself. I financially secure for the rest of my life and probably my kids' lives as well. Like, that was a huge deal. Now it's $25 million, which if Scotty Scheffler goes on to win the FedEx Cup, he's pushing his season earnings to $60 million. He's essentially on pace with the top NFL quarterbacks, which is a little crazy to think about on a per year basis. But I do think that last week was the most significant week of the playoffs. And this is basically like a fancy precursor to this point. Like if you're one of the top players, you're essentially just playing for seeding at this point. And yeah. Scotty even said, he just came into the media center here. He said, had I thought about it, this probably could have been a tournament that I could have skipped. He certainly could have skipped Memphis. I think in a lot of ways, Rory McIlroy kind of did skip Memphis, where he finished nearly dead last in the field, but all he dropped was from 3rd to 5th. I talked to him about it. I said, what should we read into that? He said, I just clicked off after 2 rounds because I didn't have a chance to win. I knew my projection was not going to be all that harmed by my play. So I just kind of clicked off emotionally. Scotty Scheffler could basically do the same thing. Again, he can't fall further than 2nd place. And he has learned through 2024 that if he's trying to peak for a tournament, he does not feel best prepared to do so when he plays his way in. So looking ahead to next season, Scotty Scheffler may skip Wells Fargo Championship the week ahead of the PGA Championship because he wants that time at home to prepare, or head early, however he wants to do it. So he said, look, I certainly could have pulled out of this tournament and prepared at home, but I've sort of set my schedule. I'm preparing. Yes, he wants to win the trophy because it's the BMW Championship, but I think he also has an eye on next week as well. So that's how the top players are thinking. And then everyone else, if you're in that mid-15s range, it's go for broke this week. Try and move up as high as you possibly can, knowing what that could possibly mean if you're getting within 2 or 3 shots of Scotty Scheffler. And sort of the lower players who need to finish 5th to get inside the top 30, they also have the major exemptions that are up for grabs as well.
Well, and you pointed out, look, Rory is going to draw a lot of eyeballs this week for the obvious reasons. He hits the ball a long way. It's going to be a fascination. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about it over the next 4 rounds. But also, how is he going to rebound from, as you pointed out, as you said, checking out last week? That is as poorly as I think I've seen him play in a long time. And it was shocking to me because I keep going back to the tournaments where he has played solid. And every time he has done an interview, starting at the Scottish Open and then the Open Championship and then Paris for the Olympics, he talked about how well he was hitting the golf ball. And that simply wasn't the case, at least on the final 2 rounds in Memphis. And if anybody can turn it around in 3 or 4 days, it's going to be Rory McIlroy. But it is still going to be a curiosity.
And I think he's one of those prime examples, isn't he, too, Rex? Like, all 3 of Rory's FedEx Cup titles have come from behind. And so there's really not a whole lot of stress, where he knows that he has done it before, even as far back as 8 shots a couple of years ago, where he can make up that deficit on a golf course that he clearly likes. Yes, it's been renovated over the past year by Andrew Green, but is having the top seed important heading into East Lake? It certainly doesn't hurt. He's the best players in the world. It certainly helps to have a 2-shot lead, but I don't think it's the be-all and end-all. It's sort of just making sure your game is trending in the right direction, I think, is a primary focus for Rory McIlroy and others. Rex, there was a PAC meeting that happened on Tuesday. Any news out of it that we should be aware of?
No news, but this is something that goes back to sort of the beginning of the summer. And I've been texting with one member of the PAC, and I had to go back and look, sort of scroll down the text messages to see when we started this conversation. And it was actually before the U.S. Open. It was just after the PGA Championship where this sort of came up, the idea of reducing field sizes. And this goes to the idea, this is kind of a domino effect. What happened this year on the PGA Tour? Because of the signature events, they went to between 70 to 80. Now it's a minimum of 72. The tour tried to make up for some of those lost playing opportunities, because most of those fields were at the least 120 players. Most of them were 144. And so they were trying to make up some of the lost playing opportunities. By doing that, they forced some fields to expand their fields. I believe Valero Texas Open was one of them, to expand from 144 to 156. The idea being they're trying to just do a numbers game here. Well, what turned out happening is what we sort of saw at most of the full field events in the summertime. They didn't make the cut on Friday evening. They had to come back Saturday morning. It was a bad look. It was a bad pace of play. I think most players, at least on the policy player advisory council, agreed that it's a bad product. They want to get away with it. I mean, they want to get away from expanding these fields when you clearly don't have the daylight. The golf course doesn't fit for a field of that size. So the idea is to turn all the full field events into 120-man events. So you're going to reduce it across the board and just make them 120 signature. And again, this is just conversation pieces, and they're just trying to lay out what the tour is trying to lay out to the players, exactly what they're thinking. Surprisingly, there was not a great amount of pushback, because I think the idea from the PAC's perspective was, well, maybe this is a negotiating point. Maybe we say, fine, walk back that 120. I mean, walk those fields back to 120, but then walk up the signature event fields to something closer to 100 or 120, whatever the case may be, because that's a sticking point on the other side. And I think those conversations have kind of evolved to the point that at least the player I talked to on the PAC came to the conclusion after last night's meeting that it's not going to happen. That the tour is entrenched. It's a non-starter. Minimum fields of 72, somewhere between 72 and 80 is what they want for those signature events. So now it's a math game. If they want to walk this back, if they want to turn full field events into 120 spots, you can do the math. But what it's essentially going to be, you're going to have fewer fully exempt players. And I think the number that they're talking about having was, instead of the top 125 from the previous year being fully exempt, it would be 100. And then the number from the Korn Ferry Tour would go to 20. You would have 10 off the DP World Tour, which would leave you somewhere around, according to the math I was told, 160 fully exempt players, as opposed to, I think it's on around about 210 right now. So you're essentially giving up 40 spots on the PGA Tour. Yeah, I think I did the math there right. You're essentially giving up about 40 spots of fully exempt membership. That's not ideal. And my guess is this will go before the policy board at the final meeting of the year, which is at the RSM Classic. I don't think it's a done deal, but certainly that's what's being sent up to the policy board.
And from what I understand, that drop down from 125 to 100 would basically be on a scale where it's not all at once, where you're giving players sort of time to prepare for what could be their eventual demise, and sort of getting there over time, as opposed to, okay, beginning in 2026, we're just going to have 100.
Yeah. And I think the earliest that can happen is 2026. So nothing's going to impact next year. The tour feels like that all the wheels are already in motion going into next year. That you, by that, I mean, everyone's already started going for that 125 number. So you can't change the rules for next year. It would be 126. Even if they do make it a little bit more palatable, which means they would phase that number in over 5 years, like just scale back 5 players until you get to where you want. I still don't think that's going to sit very well with the players.
Yeah, probably not. This has been a membership and a PGA Tour that has been solely focused on providing playing opportunities for the membership, losing those playing opportunities certainly would not sit well. One thing, Rex, that I am exploring on NBCSports.com/golf on Thursday is the churn rate that the PGA Tour had discussed all the way back to March 2023 when this was first laid out with the signature model and the full field events. They had always projected sort of this mid-30s churn, where year-over-year turnover among the top 50. For 2024, that number, amazingly, incredibly, shockingly, turned out to be spot on. 19 of the top 50 players have cycled onto the PGA Tour, which is a churn rate of about 38%. So again, on the higher level of that projection, I'm sort of exploring who got in, who missed out, what opportunities were those players provided. And in the preliminary research that I've done for this, Rex, I was surprised to learn the quality of the years that players like 51 through 70 had, who again were on the sort of cusp of advancing their careers in that aspect. You had to have a really down year, i.e. Ricky Fowler, who finished outside the top 100 in FedEx Cup points, just 2 top 25s on the season, to have like completely missed your window of opportunity to get back inside the top 50, but you still had to perform. You look at the players who were just outside, whether it's Tom Kim, he lost in a playoff in a signature event. Maverick McNeely was 2 spots from missing the top 50. He was the 12th ranked player on the PGA Tour in strokes gained total. Other players were having 4 or 5 tournament starts in the signature events. Like, they had ample opportunity and just weren't quite good enough. Do you like this shift that the PGA Tour seems to have taken now, where even pretty good isn't necessarily good enough for the following year and sort of elevating your career in that way?
I think I said this story on Sunday because I was talking with a player. It was the week of the Wyndham Championship, who didn't finish inside the top 70, but was safely inside the top 125. And this player was kind of complaining about their season. And I had to go look it up and remind and point out that in your career, this is your 7th best year as a professional. Like, I know that doesn't sound like much, but it just because the PGA Tour moved the goalpost doesn't make this year any different than the other X number of years that were worse than this. And you probably weren't sitting there telling yourself, oh, this has been a crap year. So that's the first thing. It's just going to take a while for players to wrap their head around it. And yes, I think if you're going to shorten the window, if you're going to make it that much more exponentially difficult, which it is now, top 70 versus top 125, and then moving on to the top 50, if you're going to make it that much more difficult, then yes, I think you're going to end up with these types of performances that any other year in the history of the PGA Tour, you'd have been more than happy with. Not only did you keep your card, you probably gave yourself a chance to get to East Lake. If you could have one hot playoff event, you give yourself a chance to make a lot of money. So I think all of those things are just part of what the tour has created. And to the point that you had about churn, I mean, we could sit here and be critical of it and say maybe it's not enough, but that's the meritocracy they want. And historically, that's what they've had in that top 50 category. That's hard to be critical of because the numbers added up.
Adam Scott, a player director on the PGA Tour Policy Board, said this is what it's always been. And for the PGA Tour to nail that after thousands of simulations, like he said, you have to give the folks in Ponte Vedra credit for doing so. When you dive into the numbers too, Rex, 10 of those 19 newbies were PGA Tour winners in 2024, which I always think helps the PGA Tour's case that it's still emphasizing trophies and not just like the consistently good but not great. And those victories on the PGA Tour unlock immediate access into the marquee events with the signature events for the remainder of the season. You know, that's an avenue that significantly helped players like Matthew Pavon, who was a PGA Tour rookie off the European Tour, helped like an up-and-comer like Akshay Bhatia, even Billy Horschel, who was one of those players who was outside the top 50 last year, worked his way in this year. Stephen Yeager, Taylor Pendrith, Austin Eckroat. Those are all players who were able to advance their careers by winning, yes, and then also getting into signature events and playing well that way. Even the players such as like a Bobby McIntyre or an Aaron Rye or a Davis Thompson, who won later in the year when either the signature events were over or almost over, like they were still able to play well enough before their win in order to get inside the top 50 and be safely there as well.
Well, and that's kind of one of the sticking points I think that the tour is going to have to take a hard look at, because that's the problem with the difference between the Aon 10 and the Aon 5. So the Aon 5 is pretty much just one of those swing lists, essentially how well you perform in a 2 or 3 event swing leading up to whatever's going to be the next signature event. The Aon 10 is a season-long list, and I had someone point this out to me real recently that list filled up pretty quickly. By the time you get 20 events into the season, you've probably got 10 new winners. And those people, as you pointed out, have essentially played their way in. So that list is locked up. I think the recommendation I heard that probably carries the most weight is you just reverse it. You do an Aon 5 for the season long, and then you do a 10 for how players perform during those swings.
I think that's certainly fair. Billy Horschel suggested, he was just in the media center here, his suggestion was to exempt those players from the next 10. You're already in the signature events.
Yeah.
Anyway, by virtue of winning, they shouldn't be double dipping on those. Again, if you're trying to cap the field at 72 for the signature events, it can get a little muddy later in the season. Again, providing player opportunities in those events is always going to be a huge deal. One player that I thought was very interesting, Rex, that I talked to today about this was Max Gracerman, who was a rookie on the PGA Tour. He finished second in back-to-back starts during the summer. He is one of 2 players, along with Aaron Rai, who won the final regular season event of the season, who got inside the top 50 without playing a single signature event on the PGA Tour. That shows it can be done. That was sort of the...
Can be. It's hard.
Yes. And hard is okay. The players I've talked to, they want hard. If the PGA Tour, especially with the Strategic Sports Group now involved, like they want to make the most competitive cutthroat product possible, having players have to finish second twice or win a late season event, you know, rewarding still the toughest path to get in there. Max Gracerman told me he played every single full field event for which he was eligible this year. Like that is what he had to do as a rookie. He knew in January when he started out that was what he was going to have to do. He said it was incredibly rewarding and satisfying for him to be able to accomplish that goal and now have a completely different career trajectory for 2025, whereas he probably wasn't playing a whole lot of times against Rory McIlroy and Scotty Scheffler. He's going to be going head-to-head against them probably 15 or so times in 2025, and that's an opportunity that he's relishing. So those types of stories are still available, but you're going to have to play well. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that if you're at the PGA Tour by leaning into that angle.
I think that Max story is interesting because I just wanted to look. Like I would think it'd be somewhere around 30 events. He played 23 events. This will be his 24th event. So he wasn't, even for the full field events, he wasn't in a whole lot of those either. So yes, you're right. I mean, I didn't realize that was that too. Aaron Rai didn't play in any signature events?
Not a single event, which is kind of hard to do based on how well he played throughout the season, did not qualify for the swings. But if you look at Aaron Rai's trajectory throughout the season, he really kicked it into form in the summer. Had good weeks in Detroit, had 4 good weeks across the pond, Canada as well. Then obviously capped it off with Wyndham after the signature events were over. Yeah, so just 2 of the top 50 did not play in a single signature event, and yet they still showed that it is possible. Kudos to Max Gracerman. Again, that story will be up on NBCSports.com/golf on Thursday. Rex, I know FedEx Cup fever has overtaken you. You're not quite as red as I am. God, I look sickly as I'm now looking into this video footage. What do you have on the docket before you head to Atlanta for the season finale?
I've cooked outside. I've grilled something every night since I've been home from Paris. And tonight will be no different. Tonight it's Smash Burgers. It's just me and the boys. Bunkmate, my wife is not around. So it's been nothing but a red meat few weeks for us. So by the time I end up in Eastlake, I'm probably going to need a break. I'm probably going to need a couple of salads. Speaking of, is there a first aid tent near to you of some kind that maybe you can ask them just to check on you? You don't look well.
I just need electrolytes. I have like SPF 50. It clearly is not intense enough. It has been a tough week so far, and yet it has been a very enjoyable week. I'm from Canandaigua, New York. I know I'm not in my home studio right now where I have the pendant from Canandaigua up there, but 2 of my closest friends who I've known since first grade in Canandaigua live in Denver now. Had dinner with them on Tuesday night, having dinner with them again on Wednesday. So that has been a very enjoyable aspect. And Rex, we do not do many of these tournaments where we just kind of come in early, talk to players during practice rounds, and then jet out of town on
We don't do it at all.
Friday. No.
You do it. We don't do it at all.
This is the first one I've ever done back since like the golf week days where I was just like gathering stuff for the back page column or some 4Caddy items or a little sidebar that I need to do for the magazine. This is glorious. Like players want to talk to you, and then you skedaddle when the tournament, and you have zero access to these guys. So I'm very much enjoying the Tuesday through Thursday vibe.
I will let you off the hook. Just It makes it sound like I'm picking on you. You actually are hosting Golf Today next week, so you need to be in Connecticut on Sunday evening. So I'm not making fun of you because you're dodging work, but yes, you are definitely dodging work.
I'm dodging work, but I'm no poorer for it. I do need to study up on the European Solheim Cup wildcard picks, which will be unveiled on Monday and Tuesday, live on Golf Channel. I do need to sound at least somewhat prepared for that. That's going to be a crash course, most definitely. You and I, Rex, will be back on Sunday for a full recap, however, of the BMW Championship. Also, keep in mind the AIG Women's Open is underway this week at St. Andrews. Our colleague Brentley Romine is on the ground there. You guys can catch all of his coverage at NBCSports.com/golf, where you can also find my stories from the week at Castle Pines. All right, that is going to do it. Thanks for listening. Thanks for the support. Have a great rest of your BMW week, and we'll be back on Sunday night.